The lipstick was still uncapped on the bathroom counter when her mother found the mirror. On the morning of October 19, 1999, in the mill town of Sand Hill, North Carolina, population 2,100, the first hard frost of the season had settled over the long rows of tobacco barns, east of town. At 6:42 a.m., Margaret Drury walked into the small clapboard rental on Beulah Street to drive her daughter to the hospice center where she worked the day shift, and found the front door unlocked, the coffee pot warm, and a single sentence written in coral pink lipstick across the bathroom mirror. "If something happens to me, look in the green notebook." The notebook was gone. The bed was made. The Nokia flip phone was charging on the counter beside an unfinished glass of water. The lipstick was still uncapped, the cap rolled against the faucet, as if she had set it down for 1 second and then been pulled out of the room mid-thought. Hannah Drury was 24 years old. She was a hospice nurse. She would not be seen alive again for 26 years. To understand what that sentence on the mirror meant, you first have to understand what Hannah had been carrying in that green notebook, and why she had been afraid enough to write a warning to her own mother before she vanished. Sand Hill, North Carolina, in the fall of 1999, was the kind of place where the leaves came down all at once, and the wood smoke from kitchen chimneys settled in the low places between the hills until the whole town smelled like burning oak from the first week of October to the last week of November. It sat in the Sandhills region 2 hours east of Charlotte, 2,000 and change in population. One stoplight at the intersection of Main and Beulah, a single drugstore that had been in the Markham family for 3 generations, a Hardee's, a Blockbuster Video, and a Methodist church whose steeple you could see from the bypass. People still left their keys in their cars at the EGA. The volunteer fire department still rang the bell at noon. The whole town was holding its breath about Y2K, half laughing about it and half stocking the pantry with bottled water just in case. Hannah Drury worked the day shift at Sand Hill Hospice, a small 10-bed facility tucked into a former farmhouse on the outskirts of town. She had been there for 2 years, since she finished her nursing program at the community college in Pinehurst. Patients loved her in a way that quietly unsettled the other nurses, who had been doing the job longer and worked just as hard. She would sit with the dying past the end of her shift. She would memorize the names of their grandchildren. She lived 3 blocks from her widowed grandfather, Henry, who had emphysema and who she stopped to check on every morning before work and every evening after. She drove a 1992 Honda Civic, the color of forest moss. She always carried a small green spiral notebook in the front pocket of her scrubs, where she wrote down the names of every patient she ever cared for, and one small detail about each one: what they liked to eat, what song they wanted played, what they had asked her not to forget. Her best friend at the hospice, a nurse named Della Hightower, would later say that Hannah had been quieter than usual in the last 2 weeks of her life, that she had started asking strange questions about how often the morphine inventory was audited, that she had stayed late one Thursday night going through pharmacy records, and would not say why. On the night of October 18, 1999, Hannah called her mother at 9:14 p.m. to confirm she was bringing pumpkin bread to Sunday dinner. She sounded tired. She said she loved her. She hung up. That was the last conversation Margaret Drury would have with her daughter for 26 years. The lipstick on the mirror was the first thing Margaret saw. The second thing she saw was that Hannah's purse was still hanging on the kitchen chair, her wallet inside, her car keys on the hook by the door. The Honda Civic was still in the driveway, frost on the windshield, undisturbed. Margaret called the Sand Hill police at 6:51 a.m. Officer Tate Howell arrived at 7:08. He photographed the mirror. He photographed the unfinished glass of water. He noted that the back door was unlocked, but undamaged. He noted that there was no sign of a struggle in the house. But he also noted, at Margaret's insistence, that Hannah would never have left her grandfather's morning visit and her car keys and her phone behind voluntarily, not for any reason in the world. A formal missing persons report was filed by noon. By 2:00 p.m., the Sandhill Hospice had been notified, and Della Hightower had told the police about the green notebook, the late night in the pharmacy records, the strange questions. By 4 p.m., the spy had been called. By the following morning, every law enforcement agency in Moore County was looking for Hannah Drury, her green notebook, and any reason at all to believe she had not simply walked out of her own back door and into thin air. The first physical clue was small and easy to miss. Officer Howell, going through the kitchen a second time on October 20th, found a single dark blue pharmacy label peel, the kind the local Markham Drugs used on prescription bottles, the adhesive backing already removed, stuck to the inside lip of the kitchen trash can, with 2 words still legible on the curl of paper. Patient. Whitfield. Whitfield was the surname of a hospice patient who had died 8 days earlier. The label was logged into evidence. Its significance was not understood. 3 days passed. Then a full week. Then a month. The Forest Moss Honda Civic sat in the driveway until the registration expired. Hannah's grandfather, Henry, who had been a quiet man his whole life, stopped speaking almost entirely after the first month. Margaret Drury stayed in her daughter's rental house for the first 3 weeks, sleeping on the couch, leaving the porch light on, waiting for the front door to open. It did not. The lead detective assigned to the case at the county level was a man named Earl Brockton. He was 53 years old, 2 years from retirement, a former Marine who had spent most of his career on property crime and who took the Drury case with the kind of grim attention of a man who knew the clock was already running against him. He went hard at the work for the first 6 weeks. He interviewed every patient family Hannah had served in the previous year. He interviewed every co-worker at the hospice. He pulled the pharmacy records Hannah had been examining the night before her disappearance. But the records had been logged out and re-logged by 3 different people in the interim, and the audit trail was a tangle of handwritten initials that no one could quite read. The first promising suspect was a former boyfriend, a man named Corey Pruitt, who had broken up with Hannah 8 months earlier and had reportedly taken it badly. Brockton spent 2 weeks on Pruitt. The man had been at his sister's wedding in Asheville the entire weekend of October 18th, with 140 witnesses and a videotape. He was cleared by mid-November. The second suspect, briefly, was a hospice patient's adult son who had complained about Hannah's interference in his mother's care. He had been in Atlanta on business that night, with hotel records and a corporate Amex bill to prove it. Cleared, the blue pharmacy label peel was sent to the spy lab for analysis. It came back the following March with no usable prints. The 2 words Patient Whitfield were filed into the case notes and then, slowly, forgotten. The pharmacy where the label originated, Markham Drugs, was a respected institution in Sandhill. Its owner of record, Vernon Markham, had been on the church board for 30 years. His son Lyle, who worked the overnight shift filling prescriptions for the hospice, was a deacon at the Methodist Church. Married with 2 small children, the kind of soft-spoken man who held the door for women coming out of the IGA. Brockton interviewed him briefly in November. Lyle Markham said he had filled a routine prescription order for the hospice that Thursday night and gone home to his family by midnight. His wife confirmed. The Methodist pastor confirmed Lyle had been at the early service on Sunday. He was not considered a suspect. Margaret Drury, meanwhile, began doing something the police had not asked her to do. She began visiting every family of every hospice patient Hannah had ever cared for, with a small black-and-white photograph of her daughter, asking if Hannah had said anything to them. Anything at all, in those last 2 weeks. She kept a list. She filled 3 legal pads. By the spring of 2001, the case had been moved to inactive. By 2003, Detective Brockton had retired. He died of a heart attack the following winter. The Drury case file was transferred to a younger detective who had 4 other active cases and could not give it more than a passing review every 6 months. By 2005, the Honda Civic had been donated to a vocational school. By 2008, Margaret had moved out of the rental house on Beulah Street and into the 2nd bedroom of her father Henry's home, where she could care for him through the late stages of his emphysema and keep his oxygen tanks filled, and read to him in the evenings the same way Hannah had once read to her patients. Henry died in 2011, holding her hand, asking her one last time if there had been any news. There had not. The town moved on the way small towns do. Della Hightower, the friend, transferred to a hospice in Wilmington in 2004 and did not come back. Lyle Markham was promoted to manager of the family pharmacy in 2006. He chaired a fundraiser for the volunteer fire department in 2010. He was elected a town council member in 2014. The Methodist congregation gave him a plaque in 2018 for 40 years of continuous service to the church. Margaret kept her list. By 2020, she was 71 years old and living alone in her father's house with a hand-drawn map of every patient Hannah had ever cared for, every connection she had been able to trace, every small inconsistency in the pharmacy records she had managed to pry out of a sympathetic clerk over 21 years of polite, relentless asking. She wrote a letter once a year to the Moore County Sheriff's Office on the anniversary of October 19th. She always signed it the same way. Hannah is not gone. Hannah is somewhere. I want to pause here and thank you for being with Hannah this far. These cases take weeks to piece together. Court files, archive news, evidence logs that have sat in cardboard boxes for decades. If you want this channel to keep bringing these stories into the light, please take a second to like this video, subscribe, and tell me in the comments where in the world you're watching from. Your support is what makes this possible. Now let's get back to Hannah. In January of 2024, the Moore County Sheriff's Office created a small cold case unit funded by a state grant. The detective assigned to lead it was a woman named Ramona Voss, 38 years old, originally from Sandhill, who had moved away after high school and only recently come back. Detective Voss had a personal reason for taking the Drury file, although she did not share it at the time. Her own mother had been a hospice patient at Sandhill Hospice in 1998. Hannah Drury had cared for her. Detective Voss still remembered the young nurse who had sat with her mother on a Sunday afternoon and written the name of her mother's favorite hymn in a small green spiral notebook. She opened the Drury case file in February of 2024 and read it over a weekend at her kitchen table. The blue pharmacy label peel was what stopped her. Patient. Whitfield. She pulled the death certificate for the Whitfield patient, a man named Elmer Whitfield, age 81, dementia, deceased October 11, 1999, 8 days before Hannah's disappearance. She pulled the morphine intake records for Mr. Whitfield's final week. The numbers did not match. The hospice had logged a final week's supply that should have lasted at minimum 9 days at standard palliative dosage. Mr. Whitfield had died on day 3. The remaining supply had been logged as returned to the dispensing pharmacy. The pharmacy intake records on the corresponding date showed a quantity received that was approximately 40% of the quantity the hospice had logged as returned. Detective Voss looked at the discrepancy. Then, she looked at it again. She drove to the hospice on a Tuesday morning in March and spent 5 hours pulling every morphine intake and disposal record from 1998 and 1999. The pattern was small but consistent. Across approximately 40% of terminal patient cases during that 20-month window, the quantity logged as returned to Markham Drugs did not match the quantity recorded as received. The discrepancies were always in the same direction. Drugs left the hospice. Fewer drugs arrived at the pharmacy. Detective Voss called the spy on a Wednesday afternoon. The forensic accountant who came down from Raleigh confirmed the pattern within a week. Hannah Drury had been writing down what no one else had bothered to add up. Her green notebook was not a list of patients. It was a ledger. And someone in the chain between the hospice and Markham Drugs in October of 1999 had understood that the night Hannah stayed late in the pharmacy records. Lyle Markham was 62 years old when Detective Voss came for him on the morning of June 4, 2025. He was at the pharmacy counter, in his white coat, filling a routine prescription for a customer he had known since childhood. He looked up when she walked in with 2 spy agents and a sealed warrant. He set the prescription down very carefully on the counter. He took off his glasses. He folded them. He placed them in the breast pocket of his coat. He said, "I have been waiting for this for a long time." Detective Voss read him his rights at 9:17 a.m. He waived them at 9:18. The search warrant covered the pharmacy, the storage facility behind the pharmacy, the Markham family home, and a hunting cabin Lyle owned 28 miles east of Sandhill, near the Lumber River. The cabin search was completed on the 3rd day. Beneath the floorboards of a woodshed 20 yards behind the cabin, investigators recovered a small green spiral notebook, water-damaged but still legible, with the names of 43 hospice patients written on the front pages and the corresponding morphine quantity discrepancies written on the back pages. They also recovered Hannah Drury's remains. In the interview room of the Moore County Sheriff's Office that evening, Lyle Markham spoke for 2 hours. He had been diverting opiates from the hospice intake for 7 years, he said. He had been selling them in Fayetteville and Lumberton through a contact who knew not to ask his name. He had needed the money for his daughter's medical bills the first year. After the first year, he said, he had needed it for reasons he could no longer explain. Hannah Drury had come into the pharmacy on the evening of Thursday, October 14, 1999, holding her green notebook. She had not accused him. She had asked him, calmly, to explain a single discrepancy from August. He had told her he would look into it. He had called her on Monday evening, October 18th, and asked her to meet him at the back of the pharmacy at 11:30 p.m. to go over the records together. She had come. She had brought the notebook. The pastor of his church wept on the courthouse steps the day of the indictment. The volunteer fire department took down the plaque from the wall above the coffee station. The man who had held the door at the IGA for 40 years was led out of the courthouse in handcuffs through a crowd of 200 people who had known him their whole lives, and not one of them spoke. He pleaded guilty in October of 2025 to first-degree murder, 23 counts of pharmaceutical fraud, and 1 count of trafficking in controlled substances. He was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. Margaret Drury was 76 years old when Detective Voss came to her front door on a Saturday afternoon in June of 2025 to tell her that her daughter had been found. She sat very still on the couch. She did not cry. She asked one question. She asked whether Hannah had been afraid at the end. Detective Voss told her honestly that she did not know. Margaret said, "She wrote the note before she went. She knew. She knew, and she went anyway because she thought someone might listen to her." Then she got up, walked to the kitchen, and put on a pot of coffee. Hannah Drury was 24 years old. She drove a Forest Moss Honda Civic. She carried a small green notebook in her scrubs. She kept the names of dying people in the same pocket as her chapstick and her car keys, because she did not want to forget what they had asked her not to forget. She stayed late on Thursdays. She read to her grandfather in the evenings. She wrote her mother a warning in coral pink lipstick on a bathroom mirror because she thought the warning, alone, might be enough. The state of North Carolina passed an act in early 2026, informally called the Drury Audit Reform, requiring quarterly third-party reconciliation of all controlled substance intake and disposal records at every licensed hospice facility in the state. The bill passed unanimously. Detective Ramona Voss testified at the first hearing. So did Margaret Drury, who read the names of 43 patients out loud into the legislative record because, she said, those names were the reason her daughter had died, and those names deserved to be heard. How many small towns in this country are still living above a quiet betrayal that nobody has bothered to look at twice? How many young women have written warnings that the people they trusted to read them never did? And what does it say about a community that a man can hold the door at the IGA for 40 years and bury a nurse behind his hunting cabin in the same lifetime, and the only thing standing between the two is a notebook nobody knew how to read? Justice came for Hannah Drury after 26 years. Stories like hers remind us that truth, however late, always finds its way to the light. If you believe that too, subscribe so you don't miss the next case. And if you want more solved cold cases, the links are waiting in the description. Thank you for watching.